Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV. I've been doing this YouTube thing for a while, a really long while, and I thought we would take a look at some of the products that I reviewed a decade ago that were my best of that year. This is similar to the video we did a couple of weeks ago looking back at CES 2015. And unlike the CES video, a lot of this stuff has some staying power. So we're going to get into that in just a second. But first, a word from our sponsor, ExpressVPN. This video is being brought to you by ExpressVPN. One of the things that I like about ExpressVPN is that they have a manual option for connecting to their service over OpenVPN. You don't need to use their client if you don't want to. So if you want the privacy and security and location benefits of a VPN but still want total control over how you connect, ExpressVPN has options for you. And what you can do is go to their manual page here and select a country that you wish to connect through. So a little bit earlier, I downloaded the New York configuration file from the OpenVPN manual configuration page. And if I jump over here to my terminal and load up the open source OpenVPN client with all of those parameters entered here, we will connect. And if we go over to my IP address lookup page here and just do a quick refresh, you can see that we are connecting through New York City. But what about Australia? Well, it's just as easy. Download the configuration file, point your client at it, and you can connect up just like we did a second ago through New York. And now that we're connected, if I go back to our IP location page here and hit the refresh button, you will see that we're now connecting through Sydney, Australia. Super easy here. Find out how you can get 4 months for free by scanning the QR code on screen or going to expressvpn.com/Lon.TV. You get a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. It's definitely worth a try, and I want to thank ExpressVPN for their support of the channel. All right, first up is the Kangaroo Mini PC. This was a $99 Windows 10 computer running with an Intel processor, a Cherry Trail processor, and this was manufactured by InFocus, who are known for their projectors. And it was fully functional, and it even had a little dock that you could connect to it to get Ethernet and a few ports attached to it as well. A really slick little device, very affordable for the time. I would say the equivalent these days are things like the GM K830 Mini PC that we look at quite a bit here on the channel. Certainly you get a lot more horsepower, a lot more cores, and a lot more functionality for what is essentially now the same price. This sells for about $125, and adjusting for inflation, that's about what the Kangaroo PC would cost in today's dollars. Now, they didn't last all that long as a PC maker. InFocus, of course, is still around and making projectors. I think they might be doing phones in some of the other markets throughout the world. And their last product in the Kangaroo line was this one. This is the Kangaroo laptop. And what was neat about it was that it was $300, and what you got were two computers on sticks. So what you did is you swapped in these little cartridges, and the entire Intel PC was on this stick. And their concept was that you'd have a desktop sled that you would connect it to get a desktop, and then when you wanted to take it on the road, you could plug it into the laptop and take it with you that way. Of course, things have changed quite a bit since this period of time, and now laptops are quite powerful, kind of eliminating the need to have a removable computer component. But it was a really cool idea that just never really took off. I think this laptop came out, but it never did very well in the marketplace. But I've got mine here, it still works, and I've got two Cherry Trail computers on each of these sticks, each with 2 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of storage. All right, the next item up here is one that had some staying power and is actually still quite relevant and usable today. This is a Sony camcorder, the AX33. It came out in 2015. It was one of the first 4K consumer camcorders. In fact, when I got this, which came in, by the way, free of charge through the Amazon Vine program, I believe, I did not actually have a 4K television to output what this thing could record. And what I loved about it was it has this awesome optical stabilizer in there. You see that? So it will move the lens around kind of like a gyroscope here to keep everything steady, in addition to having the digital stabilization built in as well. It recorded at 100 megabits per second when you were doing 4K content. It would only do it at 30 frames per second, but I think the current iteration of this camera, I think the AX34 is what it's called, still only does 30 frames per second at that resolution. So I think the hardware might still be kind of manufactured today. And this is an example of how some of the video production gear, especially at the consumer level, just hasn't evolved much in the last 10 years. We hit a point where I think everybody's happy with the resolutions that they're getting. Certainly image quality and sensor sizes have changed, but as far as what we're getting for cameras, we have less choice today than we did back in 2015. I also took a look on eBay, and these things are still getting pretty good prices, over $400 most of the time used. So this is not an obsolete product by any stretch, and I liked it quite a bit when I reviewed it back in the day. I did have an opportunity when I was at a cell phone announcement event to meet Marcus Brownlee, and I showed him the camera when we were sitting next to each other, and he thought it was pretty cool too, but of course he was already onto his higher end gear. But I love these little things. They're great. I wish we had more of these in the market, but I think consumers have gone in a different direction. Now these days, retro gaming handhelds running Android are a dime a dozen. You can find lots of them across most online retailers, but in 2015 it was kind of a newer concept, and GPD, who is now known for their portable PCs, was making this thing called the GPD XD. This one is the Plus edition of that Android handheld. I think the battery just died on it. Which has a slightly faster processor, but the hardware here is the same. And the original one could run up to the Dreamcast at a pretty playable frame rate. It wasn't perfect on some of the higher end consoles, but it certainly punched above its weight, I thought. My only gripe with it was that it didn't have clickable thumbsticks here. You had a button next to the thumbsticks for clicking, but beyond that, it was a great little retro gaming handheld. And what was also neat about it is that it had an HDMI output, so you could send this out to your television and use it like a retro game console in addition to taking it on the road. And of course, it had an SD card slot for loading up all of your games and stuff. Very portable, had its own screen protector built in thanks to the clamshell design, and very nicely constructed. GPD makes some really nice products, and this one was certainly no exception. But unfortunately, they have largely exited the Android market and stick to making some of their specialty handheld gaming PCs. All right, next up is the Logitech K830. This is still useful to this day, a very nice portable keyboard that also integrates a trackpad. You can't do any of the Apple gestures on it, but you can do two-finger scrolling and a lot of the conventions that we're used to on a trackpad. The keyboard has nicely spaced keys with good travel. They're also backlit on this one too, so a really slick device. There are two connectivity options. One is with a dongle, the other with Bluetooth. They sold this for quite a while, but they have since discontinued it, unfortunately. It was probably their nicest portable keyboard. What I also use, and I think is still being made, is their cheaper one here. I think this is the K400 Plus. These sell for like 25 bucks, and not as good as the flagship was here. Oddly, if you go on to eBay, these are selling for like top dollar still. Some of them well over $100, many not selling for less than $60. And it turns out the reason why these are still popular and driving such a price years after they've been discontinued is because on the Meta Quest, inside of their desktop app, the Quest will look for this specific keyboard if it's on your desk and render it in the virtual environment so you can see it and type on it with your headset on. And that is what I think is driving the price on this one so high. So I might actually part with it because I'm not using it as much as I used to, given how much it's worth. But it was surprising to see that. And it's just an example that not everything has a shelf life to it. This is still a very relevant device. It'll work on any computer now, and certainly any computer you might buy 10 or 15 years from now too. And it's a shame that they discontinued it because it does have some staying power. Now, 3 Apple products made the list back in 2015. One of them was brand new, the Apple Watch. I bought the watch with the intent of just reviewing it and then selling it to a viewer or something, but it turns out I got a lot of utility out of it over the week that I was playing with it. And I have not taken an Apple Watch off my wrist since. I really like the health data that they provide, and I really like to try to fill up my rings every day. I'm using it for tracking my sleep now as well. This is not the first gen watch, of course. This is my 4th gen watch. So it's getting a little bit long in the tooth. It's all scratched up and beat up. I've got the cheaper one that doesn't have the sapphire face. And that was one of the things with the Apple Watch. That 1st gen product didn't last all that long in the sense that it was very slow. It was the minimally viable watch product that Apple could come up with, and their subsequent release was much faster and much more usable. And of course, they've gotten a little bit better over time, but only incrementally so, which is why I haven't upgraded my watch in a couple of years. But still, it's a groundbreaking product. Clearly the market leader still when it comes to a wearable, and it's something that I think Apple got largely right on its first iteration. And of course, who can forget the $17,000 Apple Watch edition that was made with 18 karat gold? Unfortunately, I don't think it's worth anywhere near that today. Maybe whatever value the gold content has, but yeah, they were selling some high-end watches back then, but I think they were more usable than collectible. Now, next up is one of my favorite laptops of all time, the 12-inch MacBook. This came out also in the spring of 2015, and it was incredibly lightweight, incredibly portable. I loved that thing because I could take it with me everywhere. But for 2015, it was pretty slow. It wasn't anywhere nearly as fast and zippy as what we get out of our ARM-based MacBooks today, but the form factor made up for it, and I took that thing everywhere. These days, I'm using my MacBook Air M2, which I do like quite a bit, is a very nicely performing laptop, but I still long to get that 12-inch MacBook back again with one of those new Apple Silicon processors inside. It was such a great, convenient form factor. It was one of the first laptops, if not the first laptop, to ship with a USB Type-C port, but it only had one port, and that, of course, inspired a whole bunch of content about how to make use of USB-C, which was a brand new technology back in 2015. And next up, we had the iPhone 6s, and although it looked the same as the prior edition iPhone, its performance was significantly better. This was back when each iteration of a phone was significantly better than the one that came before it, and this phone actually lasted quite a while. You can get up to iOS 15 on that phone, and Apple only just dropped support for it back in September of 2024. So I think it was still getting security updates and hardware support up until just a few months ago. So it was one of Apple's longest living phones, and one that had performance that took it pretty far into the future. Now, speaking of phones, there was an Android phone on my list back in 2015, the Moto X Pure. It was a $399 unlocked phone, which was not all that common back then. And it worked on any US carrier. It had a great camera on board, both for video and for photos. Performance was rivaling most of the flagships that were out there at the time. And the notion of getting a phone like this unlocked for that price was actually kind of a novel thing back then. You couldn't just get a good phone that was detached from a carrier obligation. And many phones were locked to the carrier that you bought it from. This one you could buy direct and use it with anything, and it was a very good value for the time. Now, another new product category that debuted in 2015 were portable solid-state drives. I looked at drives from Samsung and Sandisk that year. Both of them blew me away with their performance at their price point. They were performing very close to what I was getting out of my SATA SSDs that I was using at the time. It was great for video work, and I'm still using portable solid-state drives today. And of course, we get much faster performance now with some of the USB 4 and Thunderbolt varieties. And I saved probably the best 2015 device for last, the Nvidia Shield Android TV box. It is still on the market to this day. The hardware is largely the same in the current version than it was in the original. And I did a whole video recently with praise and admiration for this device that has stood the test of time in a market that typically flushes products out on an annual or sometimes monthly basis. So definitely check out that video, link down below in the video description. And this was a fun compilation to do. It's always fun to look back and see my prior work and how I've changed over the years, some things for the better, some things not so better. But what was most interesting to me was just the view counts that I got on some of these videos. It was a different time for YouTube. I think consumers were in a different place. A lot of these were new concepts, new products. People wanted to learn about these things. Now we have a lot of stagnation in the industry. I think consumers are very well aware of what their options are these days. And when we upgrade from one product to the next one, those upgrades do not have the significance that going from an iPhone 6 to a 6S once had, or from the first edition Apple Watch to the second one. Everything's become very incremental and far less interesting, which makes things challenging for people like me that try to make a living making product reviews for YouTube. So we'll have to see where the future goes here, but I thought it was interesting to take a look at some of these things, and I think it's telling that the products that made my top 10 are still here with me. Some of them I'm still using to this day. So it's good to see that some products can stand the test of time. That'll do it for this one. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.